Alrighty then. Hello and welcome to the Future Tech Podcast. I'm your pilot, Nolan Michaels. Quick softball recap. We lost in the finals. Championship game. The other team had to beat us twice, and they beat us twice. We lost by 2 runs in both games, and we did not play very good. I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery why that happened. Just wasn't our night. The bounces weren't going our way until they did, and we made the games closer. Like the very last game, we were down 11-0. We sucked, and then I think we lost like 14-12. So we made a comeback, but just wasn't enough. Okay, so first topic of the day can be about that music generator, or it's like a snippet generator of a song. What's it called? It's called Suno AI, and you give it a genre of music, and you can input your own lyrics or input a subject and have GPT make some lyrics for you, and it will generate 30 seconds of a song, like basically just a verse and a chorus. And it gives you two options every time. It generates like two versions of what you asked for. Same lyrics, but it'll be slightly different. Actually, it could be pretty drastically different in terms of like voice and background music. But the crazy thing is that it generates the beat and synthesizes the voice. Like it sings or raps the song, and it doesn't just say the words, it performs the words. Like it's quite impressive with how it makes decisions, and it's not quite clear from the outside how the magic is happening. You can see the same lyrics be performed in different ways, and it just makes you wonder, like, what was it trained on? And everyone's concerned about AI art, and obviously music is art, but I'd be way more concerned with the training data for something like Suno than I would with Midjourney. Like, I feel like your style of art, the way you draw, it's like not inherently bound to you. Other people can learn how to draw like you and how you shade and how you color. But a person's voice, a musician's performance, seems pretty personal. If other people could sing like Taylor Swift, they would do it. And I just don't think they can. So that's why there's only one Taylor Swift. And I feel like, record companies are going to have something to say about AIs like this. Unless, of course, the AI wasn't trained on copyrighted music, but like obviously it is. I mean, I'm not going to say obvious as in I know it was, but how could it produce anything of quality if it wasn't? And it definitely got me thinking that these record companies and artists should be the ones to, sort of bond with the AI and make the AI better, offer their work, offer their copyrights to the AI so that the AI can produce a Taylor Swift song if you ask for it. However, anytime someone asks for a Taylor Swift song, Taylor Swift would get a portion of the membership, or, they would get a percentage of profit, something along those lines. If the AI service is going to allow people to make music based on existing artists, those artists should be compensated, and it'd be pretty cool if you could open up a catalog and see every artist that the AI's been trained on. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Drake, Miley Cyrus, Katy Perry, everybody, and then you say, "Oh, I want to make a Beatles song." And then you're able to, and it is the Beatles. And of course, the people who own the Beatles IP, or whatever you would call it, they would get compensated for it. I think that's the best solution. Obviously, I don't know what I'm talking about, but rather than fighting AI and having, whether it be Suno or whether it be some open source thing that literally just copies an artist's voice and, does it all on a personal computer, why not get ahead of the curb? Is that the right word, or is it curve? Why not get ahead and kind of grow together and be compensated for it? Make the AI better by letting it learn from the best artists, and then just take a portion of the proceeds. It seems like that makes sense to me. Like, instead of fighting, why not try to get along? And I think historically that's not really how record companies worked, but historically, record companies haven't had to have a fight like this before. There really have been no contenders, but we are approaching a space where you don't need the real music. You don't need the real artist if you can just ask for a Backstreet Boys song about you and it could just make you one. Again, you might have to get a little crafty with your homebrew technology, but it'll still be possible. So if people are doing it on their own, just the same way you combat piracy, you just try to make your property accessible, whether that's on Netflix or Disney Plus, so that people don't have a reason to pirate. And that's why a lot of music is free now on Spotify and whatnot. And I think that same strategy would work against, people stealing an artist's identity using AI. You kind of have to merge with the AI willingly, create a good product, create a good service. Like if Spotify had an AI that could make you a song about whatever you wanted based on any artist, I think that would be pretty much unstoppable. Now, the thing about Suno is that it sucks. Like, really sucks. But it can be good. About 10% of the time, you get something good. So 1 out of 10, you're like, oh, this thing just made that in 2 minutes? It's really impressive. Midjourney is more like, 89% of the time impressive. So as that gap continues to close, I think record companies and artists are going to have to really reconsider their stance on generative AI. And maybe that's why Midjourney gets more slack than something like Suno, because Suno sucks. The songs suck. They're just snippets and they're not very good. But Midjourney creates amazing art. So obviously artists are like, well, that thing is stealing from us. We should be compensated. It stole our data, etc., etc. And if Suno was really good, I bet we'd hear a lot more about it and there'd be a lot more outrage. Like, if you're the champ, you're not scared of someone just starting out, but you are scared of a contender. At least you're aware of a contender and you realize the need to establish and maintain the dominance that you have created. Suno's not quite there yet, but, it's only going to get better. It's not going to get worse. Let's put it that way. Maybe now I could talk a bit about Midjourney, and I asked a question recently to the CEO. My question was, what exactly is Midjourney? Is it one algorithm that you just keep tweaking over the years and it gets better and better somehow? Or is it like the process in which you develop algorithms? And the answer was not quite either of those, but what he said was really interesting. So he described Midjourney as being a whole bunch of things. Midjourney is, first of all, it's the name of the algorithm, that's fine, but it's the name of their lab, it's the name of their team, it's the way they go about things. So, in that sense, the algorithm is not related to any previous algorithms. The algorithm is what their team is currently working on. So, to go from version 2 to version 5 in a year, it's not like a lineage of family. It's not grandpa to dad to son. It's much more 3 different creations where their team, the Midjourney team, created the Midjourney AI last year, and that was version 2. It was the second time they had created an AI. They learned from it, they kind of set it aside, and they go to make a new algorithm. They call that version 3, but version 3 is not necessarily related to version 2 in any way. They'll have different data sets, and the Midjourney team gets better at creating these algorithms. They learn which knobs to tweak. They know how to experiment better because, once you do something a lot, you tend to kind of learn what works and what doesn't. So a lot of the dead ends they ran into, I'm sure they tried to avoid, but then they'll run into new dead ends because, they're still exploring, and it seems like there's a lot to explore. There's a lot to test, and it really doesn't sound like the end of experimenting and the end of exploration is coming anytime soon. It doesn't sound like we're close to the end, at least based on what David, the CEO, thinks. But what else is interesting is that he described it as, speaking of generative AI, he described it as like fire or electricity. So electricity was always in the air, and fire, burning in a pit, the flames running amok. And over a long period of time, we learned how to harness those two elements. Electricity in the air, but however many years later, we have batteries and outlets and power grids. Like, to go from seeing lightning to harnessing it took a long time. And to go from witnessing fire to steam engines and cooking and stoves and everything that fire is used for, everything that electricity is used for, took a really long time for humans to figure out, honestly. Those elements, I don't even know if electricity is an element, but they're so powerful that, you chip away at being able to control it. And then eventually, after enough iterations, we're pretty comfortable with those things helping us in society. And to describe AI in the same way is quite interesting. That, last year it was some sort of loose framework that we knew existed, but nobody really knew how to use it. And over the last year, they've been chipping away at the best ways to harness it. And right now, it came in the form of 2D art. More recently, we're seeing it sort of in the music generation space, but, not really. It's not really figuring that out quite yet. But the point is that it's not going to stop here. There is so much more for it to do, and it's just going to take time. It's going to take real humans to figure out how to use AI better. And thinking of AI as an element, it doesn't have to be natural, it's literally artificial, but an element of nature nonetheless that, it could harm us if we're not careful, but it can also advance our way of life literally exponentially to the point of society becoming unrecognizable to previous generations. I think that's really powerful and a really probably grounded way of looking at things. I think it keeps your perspective on safety. If you think of AI as fire or water or electricity, you're not going to trifle with it. You're going to make sure you don't get hurt before you have fun with it. There's a reason we say don't play with fire. It's probably because a lot of people tried to play with fire and you just get burned. Now, I'm currently a little worried that we haven't been burned by AI yet and people haven't learned their lesson. Everyone thinks it's still really fun to use, which it is, and fire is pretty cool, but I am worried that it's going to take some sort of, global news story to where either an AI tricked us, hopefully not on its own. I mean, if a person used AI to run a big scam or, steal a portion of money from people, I don't really know what would scare people enough to be like, oh, we shouldn't play with AI. Maybe there will be a consciousness scare where for like 2 weeks we think an AI really broke loose and was alive. Something like that. Something to the point where everyone will have a reference, everyone will have heard the story, and they'll know not to tweak too many settings without supervision. But I don't even know if that's really the right way to think about it. But I do think that we're going a little too fast. Everyone is playing with the fire in their own rooms. And you know what? For all we know, there have been some explosions. There probably have been accidents. No, but I bet AI's got to get a little bit stronger before it really, makes a newsworthy impact. Because a lot of stuff in the news right now, if you know anything about AI, you kind of just shrug it off because it sounds sensational. And the people freaking out on the news or whatever do have some irrational views, and what they're talking about it's much more emotional than logical. Like, if you're screaming about fire, people will probably tell you to relax. But if you're stone cold face saying, if you touch the fire, you're going to get burned, people are going to be like, oh, okay, I better be careful. Yeah, it's whatever that argument is, that emotion isn't convincing. It really isn't when it comes to like a safety demonstration. And I don't want anything bad to happen at all. Smooth sailing would be perfect. But what has ever been smooth? What what has gone smooth? Elon Musk is putting brain implants into chimps. I think they're chimps. Those chimps definitely didn't consent to that, and something's going to go wrong. They're going to have to learn how to make it work, and the only way to do that is by failing a bunch of times. Uh, I just hope whatever bad things come from future technology is not as bad as we can all imagine. I hope we always say, phew, could have been worse. It's probably the best I could hope for, but I don't know. So last week I talked about InVideo, and then I put a video about InVideo on my other channel. It's that service that you basically just tell it what type of YouTube video you want, and it writes a script, it provides the voice, and it pulls in footage from stock websites. Super impressive. A lot of people have agreed with me that they're like, whoa, that's gnarly. And I'm like, yes, thank you. I'm glad I'm not the only one. There have been a lot of people that either say, oh, you don't have anything to worry about, or what are you so impressed with? Like, that sucked. That video was awful. It said the same word too many times, and I didn't think it was good at all. I'm like, if you're not impressed by that AI, it honestly sounds like you're making fun of a child. Like Usain Bolt, the best runner of all time, fastest guy ever. I bet I could beat him in a race if he was 5 years old. You see 5-year-old Usain Bolt, and you're like, oh, that's not impressive. Look, I could beat him in a race. That's like, yeah, okay, but what happens when he grows up? Just because you're not impressed with the AI right now, what happens when it gets better? Do people really not see into the future? Do people really not predict progression? Like, how could they not, though? In the past year, we've seen AIs progress so much. Why would you take anything you see now and not extrapolate it over a year or 2 years or 5 years? Like, why wouldn't we see things as getting better? We have societies based on growing up, based on aging. We see kids turn into adults. Why do we not see that happening with technology? Smartphones before the iPhone, no, phones before the iPhone used to be primitive, I think is the appropriate word. Not literally, but that's how you would describe it compared to what we have now. These AIs we have now are going to be primitive. That's how it works. That's how it has worked. So it's probably going to continue that. So to ever say, okay, like if someone in 2003 said, oh, this cell phone is the best thing ever, and someone else said, oh, I'm not impressed, you'd be like, what are you talking about, man? Like, look how good it is. And it's only going to get better. So to see a lot of people, question why I was so impressed with InVideo it's really interesting to me because I don't have an appropriate response. I don't really have anything to say. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. If they're not impressed, that's fine. But it is interesting that, first it's interesting that they are only judging it based on how it is today. And they think I'm judging it based on how it is today. They think I'm nervous because of how good that one video was, that the one generation it was able to make. It's like, it has nothing to do with that. Of course, it's not that good, but for it to be that good right now is the scary thing, because it's only going to get better. And maybe I didn't get this across in the video as much as I wanted to, but the speed at which it was made is probably the thing that impresses me the most. But that's not true, because I do mention it in the video. If these AIs took 24 hours, I think a lot of people would be okay with it. I think it would make sense. For it to be able to make such a high quality video in under 5 minutes is the scary part. It's not a 10 out of 10 video, but if it's a 7 out of 10 and it's done within a few minutes, faster than you can cook dinner, like that is just something that we have no reference for. Technology has been so slow for so long, and slow as in reasonable. If you wanted to download a movie in 2011 and it took 8 hours illegally, pirating, it just made sense. Hey, you want to watch Avatar and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll start the download now. We can watch it tomorrow night. That would be pretty cool. You and your friends would be like, oh, that's sick. Like, yes, like I'm excited for tomorrow night. It just made sense that doing something so cool and so unhuman would take a long time. It wouldn't be instant, and that made sense. And like video game file sizes, I think the Xbox 360, the white Xbox, the one that had the red rings of death, launched with like a 12 gigabyte hard drive. I'm pretty sure it was 12 gigs. Now hard drives are like 1 terabyte, which is 1,000 gigabytes. We went from 12 to 1,000 in 15 years. And it's less than that. It was like 10 years probably to go from 12 to 1,000, you know? And back to the movie thing, if you wanted to download Avatar, you could watch it tomorrow night. Now it'll be done in like, honestly, like 10 minutes. Download speeds have gotten so fast. And the fact that, waiting and patience was built into the technological experience so recently, like just a couple of years ago, we had to wait. I think it really helped maintain our older human instincts, and it helped build appreciation for what we were going to get eventually. As in, appreciation comes from time. It comes from the fourth dimension. You want a 3D object? Well, you want a three-dimensional experience. Appreciation for that experience comes from the fourth dimension. The longer it takes to get something, the more you'll appreciate it when you receive it. I think that's a pretty standard formula. If you're given something instantly, you're definitely like, oh, well, thanks, whatever. But if you had to drive 5 hours to go to your favorite clothing store, you'll probably have a special place in your heart for whatever you buy from that store. It's just like getting something from a trip or a vacation. Something you can't get easily is always worth more. And the harder it is to get is probably worth the most to you, on average. It's not necessarily always true. But yes, the fact that we are eliminating patience from the process with technology, it's a little worrying. It's the troubling thing. That's why in video is so impressive. And maybe impressive isn't the right word. Maybe, I don't think scary is the right word. I'm not afraid of it. I just think that the time between production is what matters. I don't think a lot of people talk about that, but I think the wait, the patience is a big factor in enjoyment and appreciation, and eliminating that. Maybe waiting and patience was just an inconvenience to some people, but I think it added a lot to the experience. And I don't think people are ready to, maybe it's just me. I don't want to speak for other people, but that's why in video freaks me out the most. It's just how fast it's able to do its work. And then I was tripping out about this for sure. InVideo is able to create YouTube videos. It's able to tell a story based on just very little input. And I was wondering, like, is that what life is about? Humans love stories so much. We tell them around campfires. We tell them in book form, in writing. We tell them on stage, in theater. We tell them in serialized TV shows over long periods of time. We tell them in movies, in concise scripts. We tell them in education. Stories help us learn. We love stories so much that we're creating something to tell the perfect stories. We're creating an AI that can just tell us stories. And whether that's in video or, the AI from Netflix eventually, or the GPT storyteller that will come out eventually, that's just specialized in telling stories. Like, humans love stories so much that we are literally creating things that tell perfect stories. And I think you can argue that they only tell perfect stories because they learn from humans, and whatever. It's you're not really that impressed because it's not doing it. It's only doing it based on what it's learned from us, and that's fine, but that's not really what I'm arguing. I just think it's interesting that the entirety of human civilization is resulting in this timeline, that throughout all the wars and the famine and the disease, the survivors of life, have led to a point where we're creating something that can produce not, not anything you can think of, but stories. And I don't think yeah, maybe it is entertainment. No, but you can get entertainment from a lot of things. But that storytelling is the driving force of new technology, and that, like I just said, the survivors of human civilization are creating an intelligence that can tell stories. That's just really interesting to me. How we ended up on this timeline, or is this the only timeline? Is this the only way things could have evolved? And if you really, believe we came from single-celled organisms and then we turn into some sort of hominid, is that the right word? Some sort of ape, and then from being a chimp, I don't know if we're chimps, from being whatever, I guess you could call it, an animal, turning into what we know as human beings, that all of that has led to this. And it's just really weird. I don't know if anyone would have guessed that to happen. Like the people who sat around fires for thousands of years, do you think they ever talked about the possibilities of magic? And hey, wouldn't it be cool if there was something magical that could just tell us the best stories? Like, oh, Grandpa Monkey Man, I've heard that story 100 times. Wouldn't it be cool if there was something magical that could just tell us new stories all the time? Like, surely that thought and sentiment has been shared at some point throughout history, and that person was right, that's what everything has led to. And again, I could just be talking from my own point of view here, and it's maybe these AIs really aren't that important in the long scheme of things, and they're not that important to the entire world. But at the same time, I don't feel like I'm the only one who is seeing how powerful these AIs are and seeing the reaction of people who interact with it. It's visceral. It is, you can see eyes light up. Like something in our brains is completely captivated by AI. Seeing something mimic human behavior quickly it makes the neurons fire. And that reaction is interesting to document over the last year at least. Okay, this is kind of a funny idea I've had. Would you go on vacation if there was a resort where you could go live like it was the 90s or the 80s or the 70s, in the sense that, you don't go for a week at a time, you go for like 3 weeks? Let's say you go from July 1st to July 21st, and you go to this resort. But when you go there on July 1st, everything at that resort is July 1st from 1994. And when you go back to your room and you turn on the TV, you see the news from that day. You see what sports were being played that day. You literally travel back in time and live as if you were in the 90s. Or, pick a decade, whatever. 1800s, why not? Now, we don't really know what happened in the 1800s. I guess this is definitely just for digitally documented history. So for the 90s, it could make sense. And you just kind of live as they did back then. So you pick the newspaper up in the morning and it's the newspaper from that day. And, sports and news. But if you want to watch TV, you look at the TV guide and you see what was on TV that night. Would you do that? Would you want to live through like the Super Bowl, the NFL playoffs in 1996? Maybe that was a good couple of weeks to, have fun with. Like, I bet you there is multiple 3-week points throughout the 90s and 80s that were really interesting and really fun to be a part of. And would you go and live that experience? I mean, it would be weird. It would be pretty boring at first, but I bet by like I'd say day 8, but maybe by day 15, like that's why you can't just go for a week. Because if you just left our reality for a week, you'd probably go crazy. You'd be like, oh my God, I can't wait to come back. But if you were there for 3 weeks or a month, I feel like that would give you the best chance to, adapt to the old reality / your new reality. And then, you could walk down to the local bar and watch Sunday football with whoever else is at the resort that week. And like, maybe that's just like an episode of Black Mirror or a movie or something. But I think it's an interesting idea. And like if that ever happened, I bet you'd find people who would just go live on that resort for good. They would just somehow, well, I mean, I don't know where they get the money to do that, but there would be people who just want to go live in a different time, and you could do that. And then the extra trippy part is, what if that already happened to us? What if your ancestors went to one of these resorts that just lives in the 90s, and then you were born on that resort, and now we're just living in 2023, but in reality it's the year 2700. You just don't know that because you're on the resort that's going through time as it had already happened. Everything's digitally accessible, digitally recorded. So we're just going through the motions, and that's why things seem so fake, because they're literally just actors who are acting out what happened in the real 2023. And meanwhile, we're just on a resort and we don't know it. I don't actually believe that. I have to make that clear. But that's a cool idea. And somehow I see it being possible in some way in the future. Not the whole tricking someone forever into living in a different time, but like, hey, the 90s resort, oh, they're in the year 1994 right now. Like, I heard that baseball playoffs was crazy. Let's go down there for 3 weeks. And then sure, maybe it is somewhere tropical, so like you want to be there for a long time. And it's like, maybe that's the perfect detox for all this technology and dopamine, that you just go live 30, 40, 50 years in the past for a few weeks. Your system resets, you get grounded, and you get a feel for where your grandparents or where your parents came from. Maybe you could go see concerts. Like, oh, I just got tickets to Madonna on Thursday night. And, maybe she doesn't have to be there. Maybe it's a person putting on a show. Maybe it's a hologram. Like, I really think you can recreate the past with technology. And, there's people who collect vinyl records. There's people who collect old cars. There are people who like the past. There are people who identify with different eras of life, whether they lived in it or not. And whatever that is, I think that can happen in the future. It could continue to happen, that there would be a market for a 1980s resort. Everyone's dressed like Miami Vice. Was that the 70s? No, I don't know. Probably the 80s. And then, Die Hard is coming out, and like, oh, that could be so cool. But again, you'd have to be on the resort for long enough to appreciate the little things, like your favorite show coming on at 9 p.m. rather than being, at your fingertips whenever you want. Yeah, okay. That's just a cool idea I've had. And then the last topic, okay, this is going to get pretty heavy, but I was asked to speak about it recently, and it's the idea of AI generated audio, like a perfect replica without your consent. Is that identity theft? And how big of a problem is that? First of all, it's a huge problem. But there are a lot of huge problems in the world, and it seems like the only problems that get attention are the ones that either affect the most important people, unfortunately, or that affect a lot of us. So if you're worried about having your voice stolen, or maybe you're not even worried about it, but maybe it happens to you or happens to someone you know, and it hasn't happened to enough of other people for anything to be done about it, is there anything you can do? The only thing that comes to my mind is to have literally some sort of password or safe phrase for you and your family to, kind of establish reality and establish who the doppelgangers are. Either you have to say the phrase, or if you're worried that the voice you're talking to isn't coming from the person you think it is, they'll have to say the phrase like, what's the password? Something like that, might sound silly, but that might be the only way to combat this for now. And I really don't know how society is going to handle this. And I think that's a good example of when I wonder, why did we create this at all? Why do we have AI that can mimic voices so easily? Apparently, all it needs is a second of your voice, and boom, it can sound like you. Like, why? Why would anyone create that? And it's marketed in such a free-spirited way, like, hey, won't this save you time? You can make YouTube videos with your own voice. You can make presentations and you don't even have to be there. It's like, okay, well, thanks for thinking of the benefits, but when you're doing a cost-benefit analysis, how did the costs not outweigh the benefits? Who thought it would be a good idea? They definitely didn't. They didn't think about whether or not they should. They just thought if they could. The classic Jurassic Park syndrome. And if that's not an official syndrome yet, I think it's going to be a pretty accurate description of a lot of society's problems moving forward. Not a lot of thought goes into whether things should or should not happen, just whether they can. So someone figured out how to clone voices, and they'll put legal disclaimers on their websites and their services saying, don't use this for nefarious uses, blah, 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 blah. But that's not going to stop people from using it for bad things if those people want to use it for bad things. Just like laws don't stop criminals. Laws help, constrain people, and it helps, establish a fence for everyone to play in. But for the people who don't want to play inside the fence, they'll just leave and they'll just do what they want. Like, laws do not stop criminals. And the fact that we're just giving criminals the craziest tools ever to produce crimes, I don't see how that could be worth it. Was life really that bad before AI that we needed AI? And maybe this is a better example of something that needs to go really wrong before there's any sort of regulation or societal uproar into fixing it. Like, a large portion of people are going to need to be tricked somehow by an AI voice. I don't know if that's like a president's speech, or I don't know what would get a lot of people in trouble for everyone else to say, oh, well, we cannot have a service like this still be up and running. Like, people trying to take down Napster and LimeWire and the Pirate Bay, and some of those are still kicking and going. Like, there needs to be some sort of very visual and public problem that everyone can then point to these AI services and be like, whoa, why is that website still running? Why can you still clone your voice over here? You know what I mean? Like, there needs to be some sort of epidemic of fraud. I guess it's just, yeah, it's going to be probably a lot of small scale fraud. I really don't know. But it is scary. It's something nobody is going to know how to deal with until it's happening to them. And then it's going to be surreal because, we don't have a line of defense against it. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. There's a form in the description, but you have to understand that I can't directly respond to the form. So if you're asking like a very specific question, feel free to leave me an email instead. Otherwise, maybe just point me in the direction of an article or a news story that you'd like me to discuss on here. I hope you're doing well. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Peace.